Hathor is one of the most prominent ancient Egyptian goddesses. One of the 42 state gods and goddesses, revered as a deity of love, beauty, dancing, joy, pleasure, fertility, and motherhood. She is also a sky goddess and is associated with the afterlife, along with many more godly aspects. She's often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow's head or cow horns. In fact, because of Hathor's connections to beauty inside and out, that it would be a great compliment if someone was to be called a heifer, a young female cow who has not given birth. And yes, I had to look that up. Well, that word in itself would not have been used, obviously it's ancient Egyptian. But I dove into an etymological rabbit hole, and there are so many disputes. One option is that the heifer is from the Middle English heifer, same spelling, possibly different pronunciation, from Old English Hathor in West Saxon. Northumbrian Hefro, or Hefra plural, heifer is not actually found outside of English. The first element, though, seems to be he, or high, which is common in Old English compounds with a sense of great in size. The second element might be from a female form of Old English fair, meaning bowl, from Proto-Germanic farsi, from a pea or pear root, which means to produce or bring forth. So bowl, to bring forth, maybe a cow. Or it might have been related to Old English faran, which means to go, giving the whole sense of a high stepper, which I don't really understand, but there is a serious sense of difficulties in both of these conjectures. Etymologist Lieberman offers this alternative. Quote, Old English seems to have had the word hagfor, or heifer. The first element, heg, or heg, maybe, presumably meant enclosure, as ha and hedge, whereas for was a suffix meaning dweller or occupant. In modern use, a female that is not yet calved, as opposed to a cow, which has and a calf of either sex that is not more than a year old, and it became derisive slang for a woman or girl dating back to 1835. But I haven't seen it traced back any further. This is important, or interesting rather, because as the self-taught Egyptologist Nicole Lesser shares on Instagram, and she's found a bunch of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs that mean cow and woman. They are the same hieroglyphs other than the last symbol, which signifies which creature the writer is symbolizing about. Yes, humans are creatures, fight me. There is either a bull at the end, or a cow with horns, or a seated woman. In her post, she continued that the root of both of these words would probably be pronounced like nefer, which could mean perfect, beautiful, or good in Middle Egyptian. Adding the sunrise, it looks like half of a sun, or half a circle, to the end of the word makes it feminine. And then the determinative symbol distinguishes the meaning, so the cow or woman. So it could mean a beautiful woman, or perfect woman, or perfect cow. Why not? And it would have been pronounced Nefret due to the addition of the uniliteral phononym of the half sun, which would have pronounced like a t. In order to make these words pronounceable in modern times, a lot of Egyptologists and linguists will add the soft E sound or soft E sound between the consonants. Another piece of validation for this is that Nefertiti means the beautiful one and often adds has arrived, according to researchers. In addition, Nefertari, whose name means beautiful companion. So in my mind, it seems pretty obvious that Nefer does in fact mean beautiful and would work as a complement for a beautiful woman or girl, and could have been transliterated at some point to heifer. After that long introduction, hi, my name is Renee Whitehouse. Welcome to Detours in Archaeology. This is Hathor Squared. What is love? Whoa, 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 whoa. For a more detailed look at Hathor, the ancient Egyptian word is a bit longer. The ancient Egyptian name could be pronounced Hathor. Literally, it means house of Horus. And the single hieroglyph for her name is a square, the little tiny square inside of the top right corner, and the rest has a falcon inside it. The literal meaning of the name Hathor is the house of Horus. Scholars and historians have interpreted this name in various ways. One of the most popular interpretations is that Hathor was the mother of Horus, with house meaning womb. Even though the general myth states that Isis and Osiris are the parents of Horus, after some possible falcon shenanigans, I'll get to that in the fun fact part of the episode, after which Hathor is the adopted mother and protector of Horus from Set. Some, however, interpret this as Hathor being the wife of Horus rather than his mother, and as the consort of the embodiment of the pharaoh. Hathor did become associated with royal wives, particularly with the king's chief wife who became her priestess, mostly in the later kingdoms. However, it could also mean sky goddess, since the sky is where the falcon resides, which Horus has often been interpreted as one, but also sometimes Hathor as well. But her name was also supposed to refer to the royal family, whose mythical mother she was through Horus. In ancient Greek, the name was transliterated to Hathor. So again, we get the pronunciation from the Greek, but she had many names or epithets. The primeval goddess, Lady of the Holy Country, Lady of the West, the distant goddess, which is actually a name shared with Sekhmet and Bastet, the foremost one in the Bark of Millions, Lady of Stars, Lady of the Southern Sycamore, Hathor of the Sycamore in all her places, Hand of God, Hathor Mistress of the Desert, Hathor Mistress of Heaven. While some of these titles are clear enough, some of the others are not so obvious. As the goddess of motherhood and childbirth, she was called the Mother of Mothers. As the goddess of sexuality and dance, Hathor was called the Hand of God or Lady of the Vulva. These were both supposed to refer to the act of masturbation, which provides us with a fun and interesting view into the minds of the ancient Egyptians. Her temple was called the Home of Intoxication and Enjoyment, linking her to alcoholic drinks featured in her festivals and shown on wine and beer vessels. But Hathor wasn't all fun and games. She was also a funerary goddess. Egyptians sought her protection in the afterlife, known as the Lady of the Sycamore. She welcomed the dead with food and water, and as Queen of the West, guarding the Theban cemetery. And she was also the goddess of foreign lands, protecting trade and precious resources from regions like Lebanon and Punt, a land that the pharaoh Hatshepsut traded with, but we don't know where that is in modern day. In Egyptian mythology, Hathor is one of the main cattle deities. As she is the mother of Horus and Ra, she is closely associated with the role of royalty and kingship. Hathor is connected to the celestial sky, the sun, and the afterlife, often depicted in the barge of the sun god Ra. She is also associated with the star Sirius, the Nile River, and the concept of rebirth. Hasat is one of Hathor's manifestations and is another ancient Egyptian goddess in the form of a cow. She is shown as a pure white cow carrying a tray of food or the solar disk in between her horns, with udders flowing with milk, which were said to provide humanity with milk, the word for which is Hessa, and her milk is called the beer of Hesat. The T at the end of the word, just like Nefret, would make the word or name feminine. This is also what the Milky Way was thought to be in Egyptian mythology, a pool of cow's milk. The Milky Way itself was deified as a fertility cow goddess by the name of Bat, another example of Ba and T, who was later secretized with Hathor. The two versions of the goddess, or goddesses, look very similar, really only having the different headdresses and what kind of scepter she's holding. But the connection may have gone deeper, but I'll dive into more of that later. In her form as Hasat, she is also closely associated with the primeval divine cow Mehet Weret, a sky goddess whose name means great flood, bringing the inundation of the Nile River, fertilizing the land. In particular, she was said to suckle the pharaoh and several ancient Egyptian bull gods, such as Nenvis, the living bull / mer bull god, and their children worshipped at Heliopolis. A distinct archaeological connection was shown that the mothers of the children of the Nephis bulls were buried in a cemetery dedicated to Hathor. Plus, for more cow symbolism, the other feminine bovine deities not already mentioned include Hathor and Shadit, with their masculine counterparts including Apis, Nevis, and Semawir. In addition, in the pyramid text, Hathor was said to be the mother of Anubis and the deceased king, but this is not in Hathor's mythology, showing that in certain periods or eras they weren't the same goddess, but the cults were combined somewhere down the timeline. Ptolemaic times, 304 to 30 BCE, Hathor was also closely linked to the goddess Isis. Earlier, however, Hathor was connected more to the goddess Sekhmet as a transformation act, which I'll also go over later in her origins. As should be obvious by now, Hathor's sacred animal is the cow, and she often was depicted with cow's ears or horns, or both. In her role as a goddess of beauty, she was also the patron of cosmetics. So wearing cosmetics was seen as a form of worship to Hathor, and offerings of mirrors or cosmetic palettes to her were common. Mirrors, makeup, and jewelry will, therefore, often have her face featured on them. She is also associated with the sistrum, a rattle-like percussion instrument that she played to drive evil away from the land. Because of her ties to dance, music, and parties, the instrument also exhibits her face. Connected to other aspects of her mythology, Hathor can also be symbolized by a lioness or a falcon. And finally, the solar disk, showing her sky goddess influence. More temples were dedicated to Hathor than to any other Egyptian goddess. During the Old Kingdom, her most important center of worship was the region of Memphis, where Hathor of the Sycamore was worshipped at the Memphite necropolis. Hathor's main temple was in Dendra, but her cult spread throughout Egypt. As the goddess of love, she was worshipped by both men and women, and both male and female priests served in her temples at certain times. There are many shrines dedicated to Hathor throughout Egypt and beyond, like in Nubia, Sinai, and Biblios, and other places where Egypt had influence and control. During the first intermediate period, from 2181 to 2055 BCE, her statue in Dendra was sometimes taken to the Theban necropolis. At the start of the Middle Kingdom, Mentuhotep II set up a permanent temple for her at Deir al-Bahri. At Deir al-Bahri, in the necropolis of Thebes, she became the Lady of the West and a patroness for the region of the dead. In the late period, the first millennium BCE, women aspired to be assimilated with Hathor in the next world, as men aspired to become Osiris. Also, women aspired to be Isis, but that's neither here nor there. The nearby village of Deir el-Medina, where tomb workers lived during the New Kingdom, also had temples for Hathor. One temple remained in use and was rebuilt several times, even up to the Ptolemaic period, which was long after the village had been abandoned. Going back to the Old Kingdom, most Hathor priests, including the top ones, were women, many from the royal family. During the Middle Kingdom, women were mostly kept out of the top priest roles, while queens became linked to Hathor's worship. Non-royal women stopped being able to hold high priest positions. But women still worked as musicians and singers in the temples across Egypt, but the worship of Hathor was possibly getting too powerful for the men who wanted to keep control. The cult of Ra in a tomb at Heliopolis, northeast of Memphis, also included a temple to Hathor Nebuchadnezzar. That was probably built in the Middle Kingdom. A willow and a sycamore tree stood near the sanctuary and may have been worshipped as manifestations of the goddess. During the New Kingdom, the temple of Hathor of the southern sycamore was her main temple in Memphis. At that site, she was described as the daughter of the city's main deity, Ta. A few cities further north in the Nile Delta, such as Yamu and Terenuthis, also had temples to her. Kuseh, the city known to the ancient Egyptians as possibly Kis, was the capital of the 14th nome of Upper Egypt, and during the Middle Kingdom, it was another cult center for Hathor. Located on the west bank of the Nile, it also had the Mir necropolis, a cemetery used during the Middle Kingdom for the tombs of local aristocrats. While the city itself continued through the New Kingdom and the Roman period, it doesn't really appear that the Hathor cult continued as strongly. The Hathor Temple is in the workers' village settlement of Deir el-Medina. It started being built by Ptolemy IV Philopator, who reigned from 221 to 205 BCE, and continued through the reigns of Ptolemy VI Philometor, Ptolemy VIII, and Euergetes II. That goes all the way to 116 BCE. The Ptolemaic era temple is one of the largest structures in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. It was dedicated to the goddesses Hathor and Ma'at. Archaeologists working on the site for the Madain project found that the vestibule, the small entrance hall, contains 2 papyrus columns, which are done in the late period style, and the walls are decorated with the scenes of Ptolemy VI worshipping various gods. The main hall leads to 3 chapels. The door of the central chapel, which was completed in circa 220 BCE, was dedicated to Hathor, and its entrance was accordingly decorated with a frieze of 7 Hathor heads. Luckily, it wasn't torn down during the Christian era, and instead, the Temple of Hathor was converted into a church, where the Egyptian Arabic name of Deir el-Medina is from. On the right side and to the north of the Deir el-Medina temple, on a slope in front of the Amenhotep I temple ruin, there are the remains of another Hathor chapel with some carved relief stone blocks depicting Hathor. Seti I, who ruled from 1294 to 1279 BCE, built the chapel for the workers of the village that a millennia later would become Deir el-Medina. Other than her most important temples, she also had a shrine at Edfu inside the Temple of Horus. This temple and shrine, which were built in the Ptolemaic kingdom between 237 and 57 BCE, was the site of the Festival of the Beautiful Meeting, celebrating the sacred marriage of Hathor and Horus after Hathor traveled south from Dendra, which is approximately 168 kilometers away, or about a 2-day walk. Hathor's biggest festival was her annual reunion with Horus, which was celebrated in the 3rd month of the Egyptian summer. At the conclusion of a grand procession, her statue, which was generally housed at Dendra, would be reunited with the Horus statue in the Temple of Edfu. The 2 statues then participated in various rituals and were placed together in a chamber for the night to get reacquainted. Thousands of pilgrims came to see the site and stayed on to participate in the celebrations that followed over the next 14 days. Another popular Hathor festival was held on New Year's Day, which was considered the anniversary of her birth. Before the sun rose, Hathor's priestesses brought her statue out of the temple and presented it to the rising sun. Afterwards, there was much rejoicing, and the day ended in music, drinking, and dance. Dendra, Hathor's oldest temple in Upper Egypt, dates to at least the 4th dynasty. After the end of the Old Kingdom, it had surpassed the Memphite temples in importance. Dendra became the site of her greatest cult center. The temple complex is one of the best preserved in Egypt and covers over 40,000 square meters, and it is surrounded by a mud brick wall for the sacred space. The complex also includes a series of chapels dedicated to other gods and goddesses, like one to Osiris. It also has a sacred pool, a birth house in the temple, and a necropolis containing burials dating from the early dynastic period to the first intermediate period, with some foundations dating to the reign of King Khufu, who was the builder of the Great Pyramid. Egyptians referred to Hathor as the mistress of Dendra because it was the center of her worship. Dendra was the capital of the 6th nome of Upper Egypt, next to the 7th nome, where Haset was worshipped. After Egyptologists cleaned the centuries of soot off the ceiling in one of the main halls, it revealed some of the best preserved ancient paintings. Many kings made additions to the temple complex throughout Egyptian history, and the last version of the temple was built in the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, and is today one of the best preserved Egyptian temples from that time. Maybe they connected to her a bit. As mentioned earlier, Hathor was commonly worshipped outside of the Egyptian Empire. Another place to add to the list was Canaan, at her holy city of Hathor in the 11th century BCE, which was ruled by Egypt at the time. The Old Testament claims that it was destroyed by Joshua in the book of Joshua, but we still had the Sinai tablets, which show that the Hebrew workers in the mines of Sinai, turquoise mines, about 1500 BCE, worshipped Hathor, also called the Lady of Turquoise. whom they identified with the goddess Astarte from Phoenicia, who is also Ishtar from Mesopotamia. Plus, some theories state that the golden calf mentioned in the Bible was meant to be a statue of the goddess Hathor that's mentioned in Exodus, although researchers say that it's more likely to be a representation of the two golden calves set up by Rehoboam, an enemy of the Levantine priesthood. The Greeks also loved Hathor and equated her with the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, which might be why they took such good care of her temples. Several ancient myths also sometimes refer to a serpent of lightning residing in the heavens. While this is believed to have been inspired by the Milky Way, a similar allusion to the Ouroboros, that is, snake eating its own tail, I couldn't really find any connection to Hathor or a cow, and she generally wouldn't be connected to snakes. That's the Urus's position. But Hathor is frequently depicted in art. Sometimes a cow, sometimes a woman with cow horns, or a woman with a cow's head, but she was often incorporated into temple architecture, appearing as the tops of the columns or pillars in some buildings, especially at Dendra. She is carved into the Temple of Hathor's statues as symbolic form of King Ramses II's wife, Queen Nefertari, in the small temple at Abu Simbel that was built in the 19th dynasty. Going to her mythological origins, there aren't really many myths into where Hathor actually came from. While we can see that her importance waned in later years, she is still the goddess of so many things that lasted for so long. With her commercialization in a certain way, maybe her other origin myths had been subsumed or overtaken. Mostly, we have myths where she's just there, the wife or mother of some god, as if her presence was just a given. Hathor and the other roles she fulfilled did not disappear after the Ptolemaic dynasty anyway. They were just given to another goddess, Isis. But the mythic origins and the mythology around them changed very little in the Ptolemaic years. The mythic origins of Hathor are disputed because, depending on the message, the tellers had to relay that she had to symbolize different things. As previously mentioned, Hathor was a goddess of possibly such ancient origin that she encompassed a vast range of mythological and religious functions. This complexity makes it a challenge to encapsulate her classical attributes succinctly, particularly because she is frequently absorbed by the local goddess cults and integrated into their roles as well as her own. Some sources claim that she was the primordial personification of the Milky Way. Hathor was the cosmos, and in her cow avatar, she produced the milk that became the sky and the stars that flowed from her udders. For 3,000 years, Meteret, or Mehet-Ruret, meaning Great Flood, was a direct reference to her being the Milky Way, and was another name for Hathor. Another possibility is that Hathor's worship originated in the early dynastic times, the 3rd millennium BCE. Possibly her oldest version, at least in Egypt, was her connection to Bat, the cow goddess worshipped in the adjacent 7th nome, which was all discussed earlier, and the association with fertility and success. She is one of the oldest Egyptian goddesses, dating from the early pre-dynastic period, circa 6000 to 3150 BCE. Bat is depicted as a cow or a woman with cow ears and horns, and this is probably the image at the top of the Narmer palette that was made in 3150 BCE, as she was associated with the king's success. She blessed the people with success owing to her ability to see both past and future, but eventually she was absorbed by Hathor, who also took on her characteristics. But other stories about the beginnings of Hathor are less benevolent. She was the hungry, violent deity that Ra unleashed on humans to punish mankind for their wrongs, especially for not worshipping the gods as well as they once did. See the Sekhmet video by OSP, Overly Sarcastic Productions, for their interpretation into that story. Hathor was closely connected with the sun god Ra of Heliopolis, whose eye, or daughter, she was said to be. When Ra unleashed Hathor on the world, she tore up homes and destroyed crops and wreaked destruction. Either was already or at this point transformed into the goddess Sekhmet in her destructive form, a lion-headed goddess. She ventured far into Egypt and did a ton of killing. When the gods pointed out to Ra that there would be no humans left at this rate. No humans means no worshippers. Ra had to think of a plan to call Sekhmet out of her bloodthirstiness. He asked Tenenet, the goddess of beer, to brew a red beer, or red wine, so that god would probably be Shesmu. But in some versions, the gods poured gallons of beer or wine into the Nile, and Sekhmet drank this, thinking that it was blood, and fell asleep. When she woke up, she had become the benevolent mother goddess again, presumably with a hangover. The alternative is that Sekhmet is a completely separate goddess who just chills out after getting super drunk with a massive headache. Alternatively, some stories say that Hathor became enraged because of Ra's mistreatment by the Egyptians, and she chose to transform into Sekhmet and began destroying the people of Egypt. And the other gods tricked her into drinking milk, and then she changed back into Hathor. In one of the Hathor and Osiris myths, Isis is the main female deity involved in the Osiris myth, as his wife who tried to resurrect him. However, Hathor appeared in the story in a minor way. When Horus the Younger, the son of Isis and Osiris, challenged Set, they had to take part in a trial before the 9 important gods. This was presumably to bring Osiris back to life. The most important of these was Ra, who is referred to as Hathor's father in this myth, making this next part extremely bizarre and creepy. When Ra begins to grow tired and bored of the trial, Hathor appears before him and reveals her naked body. Osiris is immediately restored, and Ra goes back to passing judgment for the Set trial. The symbolic meaning of the story may be a balance of masculinity and femininity, and how the latter can exercise control if the former is slipping. Sure, why not? Sometimes in mythology, Horus was merged with Ra under the name Ra Herakati. Hathor's role became ambiguous, as she was traditionally both Ra's consort, or daughter, and Horus's mother. To address this, Ra Herakati was given a new wife, Usa'as, to clarify his marital relationship. Yet, the solution raised the question of Hathor's position as his mother, implying Ra Herakati was Hathor's offspring rather than a creator deity. In regions where Thoth's control was greater than Ra's, Thoth was seen as the creator. Consequently, Thoth was considered the father of Ra Herakati, making Hathor as his mother the spouse of Thoth in this narrative. Within this version of the Ogdod cosmogony, Ra Herakati appeared as a young child, often named Neferhor. Accordingly, Hathor was frequently portrayed as a nurturing female figure, depicted nursing the divine child. Generally in mythology, Thoth's wife was another goddess altogether who was identified as Seshat, the goddess of poetry. Many of Seshat's attributes were later assigned to Hathor, and because Seshat is also linked to record keeping and serving as a witness during the Judgment of Souls, these roles were also credited to Hathor. Combined with her status as the goddess of all that is good, this led to Hathor being described as Nechmetawej, which means the one who expels evil. Additionally, Nechmetawej can be interpreted as the one who recovers stolen goods. And in this aspect, Hathor assumed the role of the goddess of stolen goods. Outside of the Thoth cult, it was essential to uphold Ra Herakati, i.e. Ra's status, as self-created, emerging solely from the primeval forces of the Ogdod. Therefore, Hathor could not be regarded as Ra Herakati's mother, and her role became associated with death, welcoming the newly departed with food and drink. Hathor came to be seen as the cheerful consort of Nehebkau, the guardian of the underworld's entrance and binder of the Ka, part of the soul. Despite this, she maintained the name Nechmetawaj, reflecting her vital role as the restorer of stolen goods, a function deeply valued and widely recognized by society. As is fairly obvious, Hathor had many roles and attributes. Many of these do contradict each other, and yet sometimes still seem to work together. She was not a deity who seemingly had a minor domain, but was actually the preeminent goddess for the early Egyptians. She played a role in the lives of all people from birth right up into the afterlife. As a sky goddess, the ancient Egyptians thought of the sky as a body of water and the place from which their gods were born. As a mythological mother of the world and even some other gods, Hathor was called the mistress of the sky or the mistress of the stars. She was represented by the heavenly cow in this form. In some Egyptian representations, she's holding up the sky with her legs forming the 4 pillars that support it. This Hathor cow form gave birth to the sun and placed it in her horns every day, which, interestingly enough, was sometimes Newt's duty in other mythological stories. But she gave birth to the sun and moon each day and night respectively, as shown in the Second Intermediate Period's rock-cut tombs, which I discuss in my episode on tomb art. As a sun goddess, more specifically, regarding Hathor, Horus, and Ra, their familial relationship was often unclear, with no definitive knowledge of who was born from whom or who fathered what. Hathor served as the feminine counterpart to the solar deities like Horus and Ra. In some traditions, she is described as a consort of Ra and the mother of Horus the Elder, while in others, she is Ra's daughter and Horus the Younger's wife. Hathor also embodied the role of the Eye of Ra, one of many goddesses, but linked to her motherhood symbolism, where Ra was believed to impregnate her daily, again connecting to Nut the sky goddess, resulting in the birth of the sun at dawn, which had the feminine aspect as the eye goddess. This eye goddess then continued the cycling by birthing Ra as her son, symbolizing the Egyptian belief in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. As the Eye of Ra, Hathor also punished humans on Ra's behalf, which we talked about when she was Sekhmet, earning her the title of distant goddess for her journeys away from Ra's side. Once she lost control and became violent, Ra would call her back to a gentle, benevolent form, reflecting the dual nature of womanhood as both tender and capable of great rage in Egyptian thought. As the goddess of music and joy, the ancient Egyptians, like in many cultures, deeply valued music and dance, incorporating them into lively festivals filled with drinking, feasting, and revelry, considered divine gifts. Hathor, the goddess linked to music, dance, incense, drunken celebrations, and flower garlands, was honored through the epithets and worship reflected in these associations. Temple reliefs dedicated to Hathor often show musicians playing lyres, harps, tambourines, and her distinctive instrument, the sistrum, or in plural, sistra. Her connection to drunken revelry stems again from the Eye of Ra myth, where she is pacified by drinking beer during her destructive rampage, highlighting the cultural importance of drinking music and other human creations, and taking a break once in a while. Additionally, the Nile's red silt-laden waters were symbolically compared to that of wine or beer, further tying natural phenomena to sacred rituals. This has been brought up in other stories, such as in Exodus, with God turning the river to blood. Although the Egyptians may have found it fun and cool, it was definitely looked on later as a dangerous plague. Connected to her role as mother and creator, Hathor was also the goddess of love, beauty, and sexuality. Egyptian myths describe the creation by being with the god Atum's act of masturbation, where the hand he used represents the female aspect of creation personified by Hathor, earning her the epithet Hand of God. Demonstrating the Egyptians' imaginative approach, Hathor was also the consort of various gods such as Ra, Horus, Amun, Montu, and Shu in her different forms. In The Tale of the Herdsman, she appears as both a hairy animal-like goddess and a beautiful naked woman, or a woman wearing red, which symbolized passion, with her hair symbolizing her sexual allure and beauty. Hathor was revered and regarded as a divine counterpart to the Egyptian queens. While the Isis and Osiris myth identifies Horus as their son, Hathor's association as Horus's mother predates this tradition, with many depictions showing her suckling the child Horus even after Isis became established as his mother. This imagery, frequencing the goddess's milk symbolizing royalty, emphasized Horus's legitimate right to rule. Ancient Egyptians often worshipped divine families consisting of a father, mother, and child as a kind of triad. For example, the Dendra temple honors a trio of a grown Horus of Edfu, Hathor, and their child Ihi, and at Kom-Ombo, the local version of Hathor was venerated as the mother of Horus's son, reflecting the lasting significance of these divine familial bonds. Images of cattle are commonly found in the artwork of pre-dynastic Egypt before 3100 BCE, alongside depictions of women with raised curved arms that resemble the shape of bovine horns. Both motifs are thought to represent the goddess associated with cattle. Cows hold sacred status in many cultures, including ancient Egypt, symbolizing motherhood and nourishment due to their role in nurturing their calves and providing milk to humans. The Gurzet palette, a stone artifact from the Naquadah II period of prehistory, from 3500 to 3200 BCE, features the outline of a cow's head with inward curving horns encircled by stars. This palette implies that the cow was connected to the sky, similar to several goddesses from later periods who were depicted in this form. Although there are early indications, Hathor is not clearly mentioned or depicted until the 4th dynasty within the Old Kingdom, even though some artifacts possibly referencing her date back to the early dynastic period. But when Hathor does appear, her horns curve outward, differing from the inward curving horns seen in the pre-dynastic art. A bovine deity with inward curving horns features on the Narmer palette, an artifact from the dawn of Egyptian history appearing both atop the palette and on Narmer's belt or apron. Egyptologist Henry George Fisher proposes this figure might be bought. However, Egyptologist Lana Troy identifies a passage in the late Old Kingdom pyramid text linking Hathor to the apron of the king, akin to the goddess on Narmer's garments, suggesting that the goddess of the Narmer palette may be Hathor rather than Bat. But in the 4th dynasty, Hathor quickly gained prominence. She replaced an earlier crocodile god worshipped at Dendra in Upper Egypt to become its patron deity, and gradually absorbed the cult of Bat from the neighboring region of Hu, leading to a fusion of the two goddesses by the Middle Kingdom. 2055. The theology surrounding the pharaoh during the Old Kingdom emphasized the sun god Ra as the king of the gods, and the earthly king's divine father and patron. Hathor rose alongside Ra, becoming his mythological wife and thus divine mother of the pharaoh. Hathor transcended the boundary between life and death with ease, moving into the Duats, the realm of the dead, as naturally she traveled to foreign lands. References to her appear in numerous tomb inscriptions dating back to the Old Kingdom, where the Egyptians trusted her to guide the souls into the Duats and aid their passage to the afterlife. At times, Hathor was linked with Imentet, the goddess representing the West and the embodiment of necropolises. The Theban necropolis was often illustrated as a mountain from which a cow emerged, symbolizing this connection. In New Kingdom writings, the Egyptian afterlife is depicted as a lush, abundant garden, and Hathor, revered as the goddess of trees, the sycamore, was believed to supply the deceased with fresh air, nourishment, and water. Through this role, she became an emblem of a serene and joyous afterlife. Hathor is depicted as a divine cow that gave birth to the world and several gods. Her family relationships vary so much across legends, and she is either, as discussed, she is described as Ra's mother, as part of the cycle of rebirth, his daughter and wife, and some stories suggest that Horus is her son instead of Isis's, or as one of her consorts. Additionally, Hathor was Horus's consort, and together they had the triad with their son Ihi. And another child that is said to be connected to Hathor is the minor deity of Neferhotep of Hu, though that looks like more of a holdover from Bat, since the child was from the 7th nome of Upper Egypt as well, and was referred to as the Sesheshet or Sistrum, which is connected to Hathor and where she became their primary deity. The main city of Hu was referred to as Hu Sekhem, but the Stargate version is completely different. She is portrayed as a significant and more complex character than Apophis. She is the significant and complex character in both ancient Egyptian mythology and in the science fiction series Stargate SG-1, although her presentation differs completely between the two contexts. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Hathor is revered. She embodies nurturing qualities, symbolized by her association with motherhood and fertility and music and dancing and everything else. She is often depicted in art as a woman with cow horns cradling the sun. On the other hand, in Stargate SG-1, Hathor is depicted as a formidable antagonist, although she does die in the 2nd season. Spoilers! characterized by a menacing presence that invokes fear among the characters, especially when she returns, and symbolizes the darker aspects of power and manipulation. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Hathor represents joy and abundance and is celebrated for facilitating the positive aspects of life, such as love and fertility, and that's good for a lot of people. Temples dedicated to her were places of worship and festivals administered by predominantly female priests who performed rituals to honor her. A lot of music, a lot of dancing, a lot of drinking. The essence of Hathor in Egyptian culture reflects a societal reverence for the feminine power and the nurturing roles for women. In contrast, the Stargate version completely gets rid of her nurturing qualities and emphasizes her portrayal as a manipulative goddess who uses her power to control and dominate others, using her feminine wiles through chemical warfare, her chemical pheromone to brainwash the men into doing whatever she says. And this is presenting a much stronger narrative focused on conquest rather than compassion. The shift underscores the show's thematic focus on conflict and the moral challenges faced by its protagonists. Hathor's evolution into a villainous character in SG-1 also contrasts with her mythological attributes of protection and healing. In Egyptian mythology, she was associated with well-being, often invoked for protection during childbirth too. In the series, her attributes were inverted, portraying her as a threat through which the characters must navigate the danger, and especially, she hated the women because the women were not manipulated by her pheromones. This transformation serves as a narrative conflict that underpins much of science fiction, employing the ancient mythological constructs to explore themes of power, fear, and survival. Furthermore, within the context of SG-1, Hathor's character is the seductress and sexual manipulator, again with the pheromones, especially what she did to Daniel. This reflects the ancient perception of her as a goddess of love and beauty, but the portrayal shifts to a much more predatory interpretation focused on the use of sexual allure as a tool for achieving her own ends. This aspect diverges from the much more wholesome understanding of love and intimacy associated with the actual goddess. While she did reveal her body in that one myth to the panel of 9 gods, that was to save Osiris and not for her to just sleep around. And I don't think ancient Egyptians would have hid the fact that she would have boned whoever she wanted. While the essence of her as a figure of beauty remains, the moral landscape in this series signifies a much broader commentary on the potentially destructive aspects of beauty and power. She ends up commanding a group of male followers, manipulating their will, and that shows a loss of complete individuality and autonomy, sacrificed for service of her. It's a little bit interesting the thematic focus on military in space and the adventures diverging from the interpretations of the original Hathor, which were more connected to cycles of nature and emotional life. Also, just because she is the enemy of the protagonist, and Hathor is often fighting against the rest of the Goa'uld. In the second season, when she comes back, she has an army, or at least a large contingency of Jaffa soldiers that were subsumed from Apophis and Harrower, or Horus, who you'll learn about next time. And also, even said in the show, she is kind of the enemy of the patriarchy that the women working at the SGC have to contend with. And the men feel very embarrassed afterwards and never want to talk about it again, especially in an episode where it is brought up, because there's like that. No, they completely shut down that conversation. The series takes creative liberties to use her as a figure to explore the contemporary issues of gender, agency, and power dynamics in a universe filled with conflict and technological advancements, which is completely different than her original role, which emphasized the connection, community, and family bonds. And this all may be putting a spotlight into how gods and goddesses are looked at by ancient cultures. because potentially, even if she was seen as good, she could have been manipulating the people over the centuries. But then why would women have been her priestesses? Although maybe that's why they were getting ruled out later, because they were becoming wise and not being affected by her pheromones anymore. It's actually really interesting that when you look at the character of Hathor, then to what the actual mythological Hathor almost became, they're not too dissimilar in terms of what the cultures made of her, not what the character did. Because if you look at what the Egyptians and so many others did with her, by combining her with all the other goddesses and taking over all of their domains, seems exactly what the Stargate villain Hathor would have done. And all while wearing perfect makeup, high heels, and a crooked cheeky smile on her face. She subsumed all the gods, or all the gold, into herself by defeating them in battle. It works pretty well. That also kind of goes for Aphrodite, because during the first Hathor episode, which was episode 4 in season 1, Daniel Jackson compares her to other deities of love, such as Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and sexuality. While Aphrodite is a mother, she wasn't really a goddess of motherhood in the original Greek. That was more Hera's domain. But she did get combined with other goddesses in Rome and then became Venus Genetrix, who is the immaculately created goddess of motherhood and love and purity and everything. But Aphrodite was a flighty vixen who was much more attuned to the character in Stargate, as she was one manipulative B-word. She punished people for being pretty, like Psyche, and hated people. And she made others fall in love when they didn't want to, which is the whole reason that the Iliad and all the Trojan War stuff happened. Because she wanted Eris's apple, which was the apple of discord. And I feel like that only became the name because of all the discord that happened after that apple was thrown at the wedding of Achilles' parents. But her, Hera, and Athena wanted that apple so much that they each made promises to Paris that they wanted Zeus to pick one of them. But Zeus was like, nope. And he said, Paris, you decide. He was like Prince of Troy. And he chose Aphrodite, who had given the most beautiful woman to marry. Aphrodite went and stole Helen of Troy, who was already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, but eventually they started the Trojan War because Helen was kidnapped. I just wonder why Stargate SG-1 didn't pick Aphrodite to be their destructive gold that was a goddess of love. They did marinate on the idea that, oh, it is the same goddess. It was the same being, but she had different names at different places. I always just wonder if Aphrodite and these flighty versions of her were actually beautiful. She could have been beautiful on the outside, but she was ugly on the inside. So maybe the reason she acts so ugly is because she was ugly on the outside as well and didn't want anyone saying anything. She just made everyone else speak to her as if she were beautiful. I'm probably gonna get cursed. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Detours in Archaeology, Hathor, What is Love? Baby, don't hurt me no more. All the music came from Scott Buckley, who can be found at scottbuckley.com.au. I apologize for any names or words that I pronounced incorrectly during this episode. Egyptian words are hard, and words are hard in general. Thank you for your patience. I very much appreciate it. If you have any corrections, extra information, or any questions, hit me up at the contact button on my website, which is detoursinarchaeology.com, or send me a direct email at detoursarchaeology@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. If you got to this point and you had fun, or even really if you didn't, but preferably I hope you had fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, rate it, review it. Please subscribe to my podcast and possibly to my website as well if you like to read more facts and look at the beautiful pictures that I search for and some extra pictures that I draw and take of my various adventures wherever I am traveling or working at the time. For the fun fact this week, it's more going to be a fun myth that's going to be a little bit more adult. So if you don't really want to listen to it, you can turn it off. But here's the myth of Osiris getting put back together by Anubis and Isis. Now, Osiris, being the benevolent king of Egypt back in the day, was brutally murdered by his jealous brother Set. The setup for this is Set was jealous of Osiris because both of their sisters, they were brothers, and both of their sisters, Isis and Nephthys, loved Osiris more, even though Set was married to Nephthys. So Set held a god party, which I assume is way cooler than mortal parties. But maybe not based on this game or contest that tricked Osiris into lying in a beautifully crafted wooden sarcophagus by saying it would be given to whoever fitted the best. And of course, Set had it specially made for Osiris, so he obviously fit. Once Osiris was inside, Set sealed it and threw it into the Nile, or he chopped it up before scattering it to the four winds. In some versions, the chest drifted away, eventually becoming lodged in a tree, leaving Osiris's body trapped and lost to the world. In a different version, maybe at a different part of this version, Isis, Osiris's devoted wife and sister, embarked on a tireless search to find the scattered pieces of her husband's body. After recovering his corpse, she faced a grisly challenge. Set had dismembered Osiris's body into 14 pieces, spreading them across Egypt. Each body part was sacred, holding immense symbolic power, and Isis meticulously gathered every fragment despite danger and modern maybe disgust, but she loved him and was so inspired to press on. As the god of embalming and moving into the afterlife, Anubis assisted Isis in the ritual process of reassembling Osiris's body and creating the mummification process at the same time. Together, Isis and Anubis cleansed and embalmed Osiris's bones, anointing them with precious oils and wrapping them in linen bandages. This process was both physically and spiritually significant, marking the transition from death back to life, but in a divine otherworldly form. The restoration was not a simple reattachment of limbs. It was a sacred rite imbued with magic power, as Isis was the mistress of magic. The act of putting Osiris's body back together symbolized the Egyptian belief in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Isis's magic reanimated Osiris, but he did not return to the living. Because he was still dead, he became the lord of the underworld, ruling over the dead and offering the hope of resurrection for humankind. Either Horus was already conceived or already born and left with Hathor while Isis went along this journey, or in the version that I originally learned, Set didn't leave Osiris's body in the sarcophagus and went with the second version because he chopped up the box and the body with it and scattered the pieces across the world, or Egypt, because that is the world, I guess, at that time, especially in mythology. It was after this that Isis enlisted Anubis to help her find the pieces and put them back together, same as the other version. To make the searching faster and easier, Isis transformed herself into a falcon. After presumably months of searching and finding different pieces, Hathor had one last part to find: the penis. Flying over Egypt again, she found it in the Nile. She fished it out and, having her husband's dong, decided to poink herself with it. And I guess it was still able to come god juice because she got pregnant and, however much later, gave birth to Horus, the falcon-headed god, since she was a falcon when she got pregnant. With Set still on the loose and still a danger to her and her son, Horus was generally left with his aunt, so Hathor would raise him in safety. So you can imagine how weird it is to read that Hathor and Horus were married, because that sure sounds like grooming, or just completely disconnected mythologies. You decide. But for another version of this myth, see OSP's Underworld Myths. I have a link in the description. If you have any fun facts, please share them at either my contact me part of my website, or you can email me directly at detoursandarchaeology@gmail.com. Find me on Instagram at Flying Sapita. I have a Blue Sky account at Detours and Archaeology. I also have a Patreon where I post some extra stuff. Most of that will also be on my website except for the bloopers. That is a Patreon exclusive, but it is free. Thanks again, and I really appreciate you listening. Next time might be on Horus from Stargate. So stay curious and stay inspired. And until next time, keep taking those detours. Thanks again.